welcome to this week's Emotional Sobriety Minute. This is Earl. We decided to bring a puppy in so we get more views and likes. No, not really. The reality is you still watch it, but it's heavy stuff that we present, so sometimes it's hard to sit and digest with. Now that the puppy's out of the picture, we're going to dive into something a little bit heavier, and that's shame. And I want us to remember that when we talk about these sobriety minutes and when we dive into emotional sobriety, that this isn't a message of shame or guilt. It's more of a message of freedom. But today we're going to dive into shame. And shame and guilt go toe-to-toe together. And what I want to do is we unpack this and we start to see here in the future how we identify our shame triggers. Is shame is more of a belief pattern. So shame will be I am bad, where guilt is I did something bad. And so I think of my puppy that you just saw. If I come home and he's gotten into the trash or he did something in the house that would destroy or go against what he is supposed to do, you might have seen it before with your own animals. They'll sit down and they'll kind of whimper and they'll turn their head and they won't make eye contact. And that usually is one of the best examples that I've heard of shame. So let's go a little deeper and see what shame triggers that we might have in our life and how those shame triggers are impacting us. So I want to back up real quick on the word triggers, because I think that word now is loosely thrown around. And when I think of trigger, I think of trigger as giving my power away. Like that political candidate triggers me, or when that person dresses like that triggers me. And the reality is you're giving your power away. So if we can dive deeper into shame and guilt and see where these deep-rooted issues are and start to step into emotional sobriety, maybe we'll start to have better reactions and show more love and realize that all these things happening around us or life on life terms is going to happen, but the way that we respond, as we talked before, our respondability is going to be greater. So we're going to dive in and talk about these shame triggers, and instead of the word trigger, I like to use activation. So if I get activated, or one of these shame activators come up, or shame gremlins, if you will, I can identify that maybe, just maybe, what's going on inside me isn't a direct reflection of who I am, and I can start to dive deeper into those things and see that it's not the perceived, I'm going to use that word again, perceived or illusionary world around me. So you might be watching this and saying, how do I identify what a shame trigger is? And the best way that I found is actually in one of Brene Brown's books, a new book called Atlas of the Heart. And she puts it this way, and you can see this on the screen. It says, it's really important for me to not be perceived as blank. So I'm going to say that one more time. It's really important for me to not be perceived as blank. So I'm going to get honest, open, and willing here in front of you is one thing that I don't like. If I were to insert into the blank, it's really important for me to not be perceived as a failure or a quitter. So anytime something happens in my life that might perceive failure or might perceive the potential of quitting, these shame triggers or shame activations are activated, and all these voices come in and our ego starts to take over. So what we're trying to do is step into a practice of putting that ego or that toxified super ego aside and start to step into a space of listening to what God has to say. And so the work that we do here at Heroes Haven and some of the solutions that we dive into are different things like looking at what parts of our life are unmanageable. So that might be with sobriety. That might be different things, that anything that has grabbed a hold of our lives that have made components of it, or not components, all of it unmanageable. Another thing is codependency. Starting to dive in and go to meetings and see what facets of codependency has overtaken our lives. And so when we can come to a safe space where shame and guilt can come and die, and we say that trauma needs a witness, and you're able to express these things, and you can have somebody sit with you that is being empathetic rather than sympathetic and non-judgmental, these things start to fade away. And we call that clearing the wreckage, when we go really deep in and start to clear these elements of shame and guilt and start to step into freedom. Because these things that are holding us back from the past, we're taking all this shame and guilt and we're grabbing it from the past and we're throwing it out into the future, and it's taking away from our relationships, it's taking away from our present moment, it's taking away from every facet of ourself instead of stepping into our whole healed true nature. So I want to encourage you to deep dive into these parts of shame and guilt, and to start to dive into the solution and give yourself some grace and seek the help, because you deserve it.